Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters, viewers and friends of Ikra TV. Welcome to another edition of Real Talk. I'm your host Iqbal Bana. Glad to be in your homes again today. As I say to you every week, we come into your homes as a guest, we hope, and we leave as a friend. Every week I try and bring something interesting for you to talk about, and we share information, knowledge, experiences, and maybe inshallah hope to answer some of the questions that people may have around a number of issues that I've talked about over the past few years, around that things that touch people's lives on a day-to-day basis. Today, and I say this to you every time that there's a special program. Every program is special, but today's program is really, really and truly special, in my opinion. I hope you will agree with me as well. Last week, we lost a pillar of Islam here, a stalwart of the Muslim world in Dewsbury, a man who was internationally well known, recognized as an eminent scholar, a man who transformed the way we as Muslims worked and lived and prayed in this country, a man who was recognized for his enormous scholarly knowledge about the rules and regulations and the fiqh of Islam as well. And today, when I left the janazah and I was walking back, and I thought, here has a star, a bright star in the sky has dimmed for the last time. And we may never ever see the likes of him again. I hope that Allah does bless us with somebody as eminent, but I doubted that they would ever be able to touch the height that he managed to get to. His name was Moulana Yaqoob Kavi Sahib, was known as Moulana Yaqoob Kasmi as well. I knew him from the age of 11 when I first came to this country from Africa, and to me he was like a father figure, and I do miss him, and I missed him quite a lot even in the last few months when he wasn't well. So I thought about using my platform here to share with my viewers some of the history of Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahib. But I thought, why not also do sort of a little bit of sort of background information about two other people that we have lost in the last 6 years, two other bright lights that I feel we've lost. And since their demise, I can actually perceptibly feel a change taking place in our world, as now we will see with Moulana Yaqoob Sahib no longer with us. The other two that I want to talk about is Hazrat Moulana Yusuf Mutala Sahib, the principal of the Darul Uloom in Bury, and Hafiz Patel Sahib, the Amir of the Jamaat movement, who between him and Moulana Yaqoob Sahib, who were fundamental in bringing the Jamaat movement to the heights that they did. And I was saying to my guest, I'll introduce him to him in a minute, that it was these two who, in my opinion, were principally responsible for ensuring that Islam not only lives in the United Kingdom but thrives. I have had many, many people say to me over the last 40, 50 years that I've been alive, that was it not for Moulana Yaqoob Sahib and Hafiz Patel Sahib in particular, the shape of Islam could have been very, very different in this country. And even some of my very respected Pakistani friends who have been here since the early 60s have recognized, even though they may be of a different school of thought, that if it wasn't for the efforts of people like Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahib and Hafiz Patel Sahib, who by the way was my uncle, Islam would have been very different. Because in the 60s, people were struggling to survive, not just to keep their imans intact as well. But we'll talk about it in a little while. I have with me, and I'm hoping that I'll be joined in a little while by another colleague, a friend of mine, who is also a well-known person to the view of Ikra TV. I have with me Siddiq Patel Sahib, who was a lawyer, family lawyer, who knew Moulana Yaqoob Sahib Rahmatullah very well, who worked with him very closely. Although he looks very young, but he was immensely close to Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahib. May Allah bless him and give him the highest place in Jannah over the last few years, many, many years. And he will share about and talk about Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahib's influence, his enormous achievements, and the work that he did with us all. As I say, for me, I don't think we will see the likes of him again unless we are really blessed by Allah which I hope we are. But Moulana Yaqoob Sahib in particular, who was an enormous scholar, not only that, he was a man of extreme foresight. He could see 20, 30 years ahead and could tell you what we need to do to ensure that we keep to the principles and values and the fundamentals of Islam. Bhai Siddiq Bhai, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Iqra TV and welcome to Real Talk. Thank you very much for coming here. I know you're a lawyer. You're not an Islamic scholar. Neither am I. I keep saying to everybody I'm the most sinful person who shouldn't be doing any of this at all. But welcome here. You worked very, very closely with Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahib, rahmatullah. I mean, obviously, as a young man, how did you find him? Because as I said, he was quite a liberal person in some, many senses. He was articulate. He had enormous foresight. But I mean, as a person, obviously, you became very friendly with him. You knew him quite well. How did you find him?
Well, walaikum salam and jazakallah. Thank you very much for having me on. That's actually a really good question. The way that I actually got to know Moulana Yaqoob Sahib as a person was after I came back from my studies at university and after I had obtained my law degree, after which I didn't want to do law at all.
All right.
And I was quite disillusioned with the legal profession. And I was back in Dewsbury, and I've learned that this scholar had set up something called a Sharia Council.
Yes, he was responsible for setting up the first Sharia Council.
So I was intrigued because, as far as I understood it at the time, and which is still correct, there is only one law which is actually of this country and which has jurisdiction, and that's the law of England and Wales. And I wanted to know what this scholar did, and I wanted to know how it impacted British Muslims. So alhamdulillah, somehow I plucked up the courage to go and see him.
Wow.
He was, as people living in Saviltown, Dewsbury, because we had such ready access to him, I don't think we understood, and I think now it's only now coming to light, how much of a titan we had in our midst.
Oh, mashallah, yeah, definitely.
And so one day after Salah, I approached him, I introduced myself. He knew, of course, who I was and who my family were. And so he invited me to observe the workings of the Sharia Council.
Right.
So this was in my early 20s. And so I attended, and I quickly learned that the setting up and the existence of Sharia councils by Moulana Yaqoob Sahib in Dewsbury was primarily a mechanism to help Muslim women move on with their lives when husbands refuse to give talaq. Now, that's a very simplistic overview of what the Sharia Council actually does and the types of issues and problems that it has to grapple with. And so I quickly understood the process of the Sharia Council. I then started to spend more time, and he welcomed me. And this was one of Moulana Sahib's great qualities, that he took under his wing or encouraged people from all walks of life, whether you're an alim or not an alim, to be the best sort of Muslim that you can be. And he understood my studies as a legal, as somebody from the legal profession, and that I still had some way to go in terms of the practice element before I actually qualified. And he encouraged me to pursue a career in family law, and marrying the needs of the Muslim community with the professional services that a lawyer can provide to help Muslims.
So he bridged the gap between the two legal systems.
He made me understand that there was a gap to bridge.
He,
as you said in your introduction, he had great foresight, and he saw the need there, and he encouraged me to sit by his side. And one of the few scholars in my time who was so great in his stature, and I understood very quickly, alhamdulillah, after spending time with him at home and at the Sharia Council, that this was somebody who was actually so good at what he did, and not more than just an Islamic scholar. And I was very lucky to spend time with him at his home as well. And what you have to remember is Moulana Sahib did a lot of work. He was a pioneer in so many different aspects of Islam. His mission in coming to this country was Islam and Muslims. And he came on the connection, on the Nisbat of Tabligh, and he was the first student of Darul Uloom Deoband to come to the UK as an Imam. And he was the last surviving student of Sheikh Imam Hussain Ahmad Bani Sam Rahmatullah alayh. But on that basis, and after the connection with Hafiz Sahib Marhum Rahmatullah Alayh, and the amazing work, the actually, the trailblazing work in the Arab world in terms of the Tabligh work, because theirs were one of the first Jamaats to go into the Arab world. The Aqabirin of India quickly realized how fluent his Arabic was and sent him to Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and they made a lot of sacrifice there. So then on the nisbat of Tabligh and Imamat, he came to the UK in the 60s, as you said, and did the work of Tabligh here, calling people to just start praying namaz first and foremost, becoming instrumental in setting up institutions and mosques for Muslims to pray their salah. And then afterwards, he understood the needs and the problems and the social problems that were affecting Muslims, and the Sharia Council was one of them. So in long form answer to your question, that's how I met him.
Right.
And
I mean, obviously,
that's how I carried on with him.
he was one of the pioneers of the Muslim world in this country. As you say, he came here in the 60s, and I personally witnessed Hazrat Moulana Sahib in the masjid, the madrasa and masjid that we used to attend, that he used to, in the old days, I mean, young people will probably not know, will not be aware of this, may not have even seen it. We used to have coin box phones, where you used to put coins in there when you make a phone call. And I used to see him quite often putting his own personal money, making long distance phone calls to people of Arab speaking people, asking them, please help us join this movement, come and help us revive Islam, bring our Muslim brothers into the fold of Islam. And this Tabligh Jamaat movement that he did. And as I say, he and Hafiz Patel Sahib, he was the right hand man, the rock behind Hafiz Patel Sahib. Hafiz Sahib obviously was the Amir, and I don't think Hafiz Patel would have been able to do the work that he did without Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahib being there, backing him and supporting him and encouraging him and guiding him as well. So, obviously there was this very enormous sort of knowledge. But just a little bit of background, Hazrat Moulana Yaqoob Sahib. I mean, I know, I have a little bit of knowledge, but you have more knowledge than that. Where he came from in India, where he studied, and who his mentors were.
Yeah. Well, I think we are very blessed that we had somebody in our midst who himself spent company in some of the great sheikhs and pious elders of this age. He was a contemporary, or he was a student of Dawlum Deoband, and he taught at Dabel and Randair, but he quickly joined Tabligh in India, and under the auspices of Sheikh Yusuf Rahmatullah Alayh, Moulana Yusuf Khandalvi Rahmatullah Alayh, who was the head of Tabligh at the time. And he would say that, I mean, I was fortunate enough to speak to family members over the last few days, and right. They were, without their support and without their help as well, today wouldn't have been possible. And they advised me that Moulana Yusuf Sahib Rahmatullah Alayh, Sheikh Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi Rahmatullah Alayh, Moulana Manzoor Nomani Rahmatullah Alayh, and obviously Imam Hussain Ahmed Mani Rahmatullah Alayh, they were great influences on him. Sheikh Yusuf Rahmatullah Alayh on the Tabligh side of things, Sheikh Abul Hasan Ali Nadwi on the Arab world side of things in terms of the written works that he did. Moulana Manzoor Nomani on the political side of things, and Imam Hussain, on the ills of the affecting Muslim society, and Sheikh Imam Hassan Ahmed Mani Rahmatullah Alayh on the political side of things. And I think when you spent time with Moulana Yaqoob Sahib, you saw these things coming out, seeping, exuding out of him. He was a man of deep principle. He was a man who was always on the side of the truth and was not afraid to speak out on the truth, irrespective of who it was. And he'd do so with respect, but he'd do so with erudition, he'd do so with merit, and his argument was vociferous and persuasive. And
based on knowledge, enormous
absolutely.
Amounts of knowledge as well.
And one of the things he did every day for 12 years in Zakaria Masjid in Dewsbury, and he did it twice actually, first in Savile Grove, and then when Zakaria Masjid moved to South Street, which is the tafsir of the Quran. Now this, to those who attended, for people like myself, I was lucky enough to attend for the last few years. I wasn't there for the full 12 years. Every Monday to Wednesday after Asr Salah, unless he was away on travels or there was another talk by another scholar, for 40 minutes, 20 to 40 minutes, he would deliver the tafsir on the Holy Quran. And as viewers will know, that tafsir is the exegesis, the explanation of the Quran, going through ayat by ayat and explaining to people in layman's terms what Allah is trying to tell us through His book. And I can remember sometimes I'd go to his house and he'd be preparing for the tafsir. And he'd have at least 2 to 3 different kitabs open in front of him.
Oh yeah.
And he would be, and I'd ask him, how long would you prepare for each tafsir? And for a 20 to 30 minute tafsir, he would spend at least 2 to 3 hours of prep every day. His diligence and his approach to the work that he did was legendary and inspirational. As a lawyer, as something I noticed back then, truly professional. And of course, Moulana Sahib's intention was the pleasure of Allah.
Yes,
but you could sense that because of the elders that he spent time with, and the stories of the Sahaba and the stories of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and the deep connection to the Quran that he had, which he explained to us through his tafsir, that it affected him and it came out in his life as well. If you were lucky enough to sit in his tafsir, you would know that sometimes, quite often, he would quote from a kitab that he had read. And every single time he would quote from a book that he had read about a certain point, he would quote to you the name of the book, the author of the book, if there was more than one volume in the collection, how many volumes there were, and from which volume that particular quote was, and how many pages in that particular book.
Well, he was a man that most of the ulamas in this country, from the Deobandi school of thought, would go to for guidance and support and instructions. I mean, as I say, while Hazrat Moulana Sahib was very modest, and I, as I say, from the age of 11, I knew him and got to be close to him at times, and I used to see him as a father figure to me. But he was a man, as you said, was no compromise. The truth was there, and he told you the absolute truth of what Islam expects you to do and to behave. But also, I mean, touching on something you mentioned earlier, he also had enormous political nous. He was not like some of the people who stay out of politics. Although he was not directly involved in politics, but he kept aware himself of what was going on around him, around the country, around the political world. And obviously that influenced him as well. And he would put everything in the context of the politics as well as the Islamic values that we had to adhere to. And I found that illuminating. I found that refreshing. You don't see much of that from some of the other ulama. Moulana Yusuf Mutahhar Sahib was very similar. I used to go and see Hazrat Moulana Yusuf Mutahhar Sahib at weekends. Sometimes I used to ring him and I used to say, Hazrat, how are you? How are you doing? And he used to say, Iqbal bhai, I'm alone at home. If you want to come, I'd go and spend a couple of times. And I was absolutely blown away. And here's a man who sits in Bury, the small corner of the world, right? But he knows everything that is going on. We didn't have internet in those days. We didn't have mobile phones. But yet he had all this awareness of what was happening in the world. Hazrat Maulana Yaqoob Sahib was very much like that as well.
Absolutely.
And he was instrumental in, I mean, many people will not know this, the prayer timetable that we use now, right, would have been very, very different if Hazrat Maulana Yaqoob Sahib had not done some of the research and found some of the faults in the previous timetable that was set by some very eminent ulamas who didn't didn't have some of the knowledge that Hazrat Maulana Yaqoob Sahib had, and therefore they set the timetables, and Allah blessed them for the work that they had done prior to Hazrat Maulana Yaqoob Sahib doing all this research and study. Our timetable now is based on enormous amount of work and research that Hazrat Maulana Yaqoob Sahib did, and that is something that you maybe allude to, you may have more knowledge of.
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, there are so many examples of his deep scholarship affecting so many different issues in relation to how a Muslim lives his or her lifestyle. Prayer times was one of them.
It's fundamental.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Prayer times are fundamental to our lives.
Absolutely. And he discovered the discrepancy in the establishing of actual Isha time in the summer in the British Isles. And we won't go into too much technicality here, but purely because there was no true Isha time. And he spotted that. And after he spotted this error, he then researched it. And this led him into, he was accepted by many ulama kiram as an authority within Islamic scholarly circles on astronomy. because of the knowledge that he had to acquire himself in order to be able to understand the problem, find a solution through Islamic fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, and then explain this to ulama kiram. So explaining the depth of the existence of the problem at first, giving them the ihsas that this was there in existence, and then showing them the solution. And this was exactly the same when it came to the issues such as moon sighting, and this was exactly the same when it came to the establishment of Sharia councils. I was present in many conversations when young ulama or ulama from across the world and across the country would come and observe Moulana Sahib's work at the Sharia Council. And after seeing what he did and in the manner in which he did it, would be given confidence themselves into establishing something similar. And Moulana Sahib would give them so much himmat, so much empowerment. That word empowerment today, Iqbal Bhai, is overused in the zeitgeist. But Sheikh Sahib was, Moulana Yaqoob Sahib was the epitome of somebody who truly empowered somebody to do what they could within their means, within their circle, within their expertise, in furthering the cause of Islam. And he did that with me, and he did that with so many scholars as well who came to sit with him, because especially in terms of work to do with Sharia councils, the nature of disputes is such that there's more than likely going to be one party that's not always happy with the outcome. And you need somebody strong and resolute to be able to do that from a perspective of where it is in accordance with the laws of the Quran and in accordance with Sunnah, and having the deep knowledge to do that. And he married that with an understanding and a truly, truly perceptive understanding of what was happening in British Muslim culture at that time.
At that particular time.
And he was...
And how some people were being left, particularly sisters who were being left in very challenging and difficult times.
Absolutely.
Because of, sometimes men were not willing, they didn't want to live with them, but they didn't want to free them as well so they could carry on with their lives. And the Sharia Council obviously was let's say it was a controversial development at that time. There was a lot of controversy from the establishment side, I mean the government establishment side. But it was a sort of something that our community needed desperately in order to solve some of the problems in our community.
Well, let me tell you, as a practicing family lawyer, as a qualified lawyer, we'll have
to take a break here, inshallah, very soon. I hope you found the first part so interesting. Inshallah, we'll come back. Don't go away. We'll be with you back soon. Take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.